I wanted to stop by this segment for a bit. This might perk up site chat. Site chat's been quiet today. See, you guys have been listening acutely, listening prudently to the updates about negotiations. But I wanted to maybe take in an alternative theory. Because today we've been talking about the reasons as to why negotiations have been failing, and we've said things like, well, red lines and the policy around red lines, and if you treat red lines flippantly and you let people pass them, cross them with no consequence, then your word becomes worthless, and then the only way you can compel action is through aggressive means of deterrence, when before maybe suggestions and verbal warnings that could have avoided the more nasty consequences of dirty diplomacy could have been avoided. But instead of that, I think Tucker Carlson has a much more prudent, much more attuned, much more hip suggestion, saying that it could be women that caused the war in Ukraine because female leadership leads to violence. Listen to him.
Female leadership leads to violence, and you see it. It's Winnie Mandela, man. It's really the Bolsheviks' wives were more bloodthirsty than they were. I don't know exactly what that is. I think weak male leadership incites something in women that's really dark. That's not their fault. That's men's fault. Men's job is to lead. You can't shirk that duty because it's not created by man. It's pre-existent.
Well, they found in studies in Total War, like women commit way more war crimes than men.
There's something about female.
It is very interesting that this topic came up with Alex Jones as the co-host. It's good that he has a voice of reason on the program.
There's something about female leadership that gets you very quickly to violence, and you see it in the support for the Ukraine war, which is like the murder of an entire country's male population.
And now, though, a bunch of European countries are doing female conscription. I wonder if combat is going to get the women to not be for war.
I wonder why you would even bother with a civilization if you're sending your women to fight wars. I don't understand. Just give up at that point.
Well, it's like Ursula von der Leyen.
You only have a military to protect your women. That's the point. There's only one reason, and that's to protect my wife and my daughters. And if it weren't for that, why would we need a military? And so if I'm sending my wife and my daughters to go fight a war on my behalf, I mean, that is the most grotesque thing I could imagine. That is so shameful. That is so disgusting. I don't know how we can.
Well, it is. You got
live with that.
Ursula von der Leyen, the unelected EU head, literally talking about, there's too many humans. We need depopulation. You pull it up, and we're going to beat Russia, no problem. And I'm sorry, like, I have no respect for her.
Okay, so the reason. Okay, let's do it three statements. The first one: the reason the military exists is to protect women. The reason the military exists is to protect the state. And you are an outgrowth of the state. As an American citizen, you are an outgrowth, so it's there to protect you. It's meant to protect women. It's meant to protect elderly people. It's meant to protect children. It's meant to protect your resources. It's meant to protect your community, your town. Like, if you evacuate, like, here's a question. If it's just to protect women, then to be clear, if the Chinese invaded and the strategy was defend your town, but a couple might die, versus evacuate everyone and abandon your town to the Chinese invasion, you have to choose option B, because if the purpose of the military is to protect women, then the death of a single woman is not worth the defense of any town. So I mean, it's preposterous on its face. Preposterous on its face. Women are one of the groups more typically protected by the armed forces because they tend to not go to war. So seems a little silly to classify it that way. Really looks like it's going for like a quippy quote more than talking about the purpose of the armed forces. Also, before we get to the women pursuing the war in Ukraine, why try as a society? Why not give up if you have to send? The Soviet Union would have long ago surrendered if sending women to war was the standard. If you're facing an annihilation type event where your options are mass extinction versus women in armed service, people tend to lean towards women in armed service. if the question is you're going to lose your hometown, or the residents of your town, including the women, are going to learn how to pilot a drone. I mean, piloting a drone is something that a woman can learn to do. And there's no reason that a woman couldn't pilot a drone just as good as a man. A woman can also hide in a hole just as good as a man. A woman can also make herself small just as good as a man. And a woman, by popular misconceptions, can also drive in and out of position just as good as a man given the right training. So I can think of a role for a woman on the battlefield very simply. And if our community is facing destruction, if our way of life is facing annihilation, if our family and our extended family and our community, nation, county, city is facing destruction, these are all reasons why a woman might choose to serve, why women have chosen to serve in the past, both in the United States Armed Forces, both as medical personnel, logistics, and even at times combat personnel, and in other countries, be it Serbia, be it Ukraine, be it the entirety of the Soviet Union, be it any number of countries and peoples, be it now the women who have engaged in revolutionary action in Myanmar. I mean, why would a woman pick up guns when their option is ISIS enslavement? As the other do you pick up a gun and fight as a Kurdish militant, as a Yazidi woman, to not be a slave, or do you be a slave? Okay, there's a lot of reasons as to why women might pick up a gun, and the fact that he couldn't think of any is to just show how the microwave dinner king, Mr. Swanson, is just really that pampered. Now, on to the last idea, that women are the ones who are in favor of the war in Ukraine. They're the ones who are pushing war. Women have this violent tendency. Look, there are women leaders who have engaged in war. Queen Victoria. There are women where you can look at, they engage in empire, they engage in war. But it might be a question of, are those women just emulating the traits of previous male leaders? Are those women not just doing what other leaders have done, irrespective if they're a man or a woman, because the incentives to go to war that existed for a man also exist for a woman, whether it be resource gathering, whether it be alliance building, whether it be protection of one's sovereignty, or the revocation of another nation's, whether it be building colonialism, whether it be any of these things. Like these motivations still exist for the state, which are going to pull that leader in this or that direction. I'm not saying that it couldn't have any effect, but the idea that they're particularly more violent from positions of leadership is just quite silly. And to use Ukraine as the example, there is not a single female leader involved directly in the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, he is the one who decided that the war was going to happen, both back in 2014 and in 2022. That's a man. In 2014, on the Ukrainian side, you have Yanukovych, who was eventually replaced by Petro Poroshenko. Those are two men. Who was eventually replaced by Zelensky, another man. On the American side, you've got Barack Obama, then you've got Joe Biden, then you've got Donald Trump. If you look at the inner circle of Zelensky, mostly men. If you look at the inner circle of Donald Trump, mostly men. If you look at the inner circle of Vladimir Putin, those in actual decision-making positions, almost entirely men. If you look at the owners of the top military industries, military manufacturing in Ukraine, military manufacturing in the United States, military manufacturing in Russia, largely men, almost entirely, if not entirely men in the case of Russia. So where do the women get involved? Go to Germany, Olaf Scholz. Now you've got Merz. Go to the United Kingdom. Who do you have? Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, calmer. I mean, the only woman that I can think of that has been consistently involved in this would have to be Ursula von der Leyen, which, I mean, as you know, as EU head, that is a significant position of influence. But the ones who have been largely pushing support for Ukraine or on the Russian side, support for invasion, have been men. Now you have examples for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, where you have some women leadership, but then we also need to assume that's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. That's not changing if it's a man or a woman. If you're an Estonian, you've got a bone to pick. So I don't know why he has chosen this specific idea that women leadership is a problem, although he also writes it as if really it's men's fault for failing women, to thinking that they had to lead in the first place. And in the war in Ukraine is a ridiculous example of it. I think in his head, in the head of his viewers, he thought it would go like this. I see elderly white women in the United States flying Ukraine flags at protests. Therefore, there's something in women that makes them pro-war, even though there's a million different false premises stacked on top of each other. Number one, the idea that these elderly pro-Ukrainian women are supposedly, they love war, that they wouldn't like to see the war end as soon as possible, but they acknowledge, unlike Tucker, unlike Alex, unlike these people who view war naively like a child, that wars don't just end by passively hoping for peace, that actions might have to be taken, and that how a war ends will also affect the people that live there, and that we made commitments to the Ukrainians, and then we shouldn't go back on our commitments and act like backstabbing snakes. That might not matter for somebody like Tucker. It might matter for them. Right? But going past that idea that these elderly people just want war, even if it was like these elderly people were particularly bloodthirsty, I mean, it was men who started the war. It is men who proliferate the war. It is the men who profit off of the war. This just seems like a way to point towards women and say, well, golly gee willikers, you know, maybe we haven't done a good run of things, but if they were in charge, oof, we know it certainly would be worse. When we don't know. Honestly, my opinion is we'd probably be in the same hole. I mean, you think it was Angela Merkel, the one who put forward Nord Stream, the one who put forward economic integration with the Russians, that was charging us, barreling us towards war, the one who was trying to make these deals with the Russians in the Donbass? Anyway, this is a quick fix pop politics solution. You don't like war? Women. Am I right?